Parental alienation is not a gender issue, it's a child welfare issue. I think that it's often helpful to place the well-being of and the outcomes of a young person or a child at the centre. Very often we have well-meaning and well-intentioned professionals coming to these cases, and they unwittingly end up doing more harm than good. They might make a determination of parental alienation when actually it isn't parental alienation. That does an incredible disservice to the true victims of parental alienation. I'd like to emphasise the point that training and education for social, legal and mental health professionals is absolutely crucial in this space. I think an awareness of relational pathologies, in fact more than an awareness of relational pathologies, is incredibly important. Alienating behaviours in severe cases, you're dealing with incredibly manipulative people. And it will be very easy for these personalities to triangulate the professional into an unhealthy alignment. And then the professional is compromised, either consciously or unconsciously. In cases of severe alienation, those who know what they're talking about in this space know very, very well that it is psychological and emotional abuse of a child. And it needs to be responded to like we would all other forms of abuse. We're dealing with parents where there is no finding of fact that they have been an abusive or neglectful parent. Which of course brings us into the ideas around allegations. A case I worked on recently, there was 16 allegations against that parent. And each of those 16 allegations had been referred to TUSLA, which is the Child Protection Services in Ireland, or the Child Protection Agency in Ireland. And they had closed the file on each of those 16 allegations, saying there was no child concerns. And of course that's what happens in cases of alienation. There will be multiple allegations. And we know very, very clearly that men will often allege physical and emotional abuse, and women will often allege sexual abuse. But the key thing is that all allegations are investigated thoroughly to ensure the safety of the child, but that happens quickly. Because very often, certainly in Ireland, what can happen is the allegation can then perpetuate the alienation. Very often in severe cases, we're in a position where we have a parent who is unwilling or unable to motivate behaviour change in themselves, to place the developmental needs of the child first. When we go back 3 generations, we see that the dynamics in terms of what's often referred to as alienation or parental alienation across the generations. And so I would often view this as an opportunity to arrest the transgenerational nature of these dynamics. And essentially what that means is that the children and young people of the current generation do not go on to perpetuate those dynamics in their family of creation in the years to come. I explored the models that were out there pre-2019, and the specific models I was looking for was the models that were supported in empirical literature. What aspects of these models might be helpful in an Irish context? The name that I've put on it in Ireland is the Reconnecting Family Model of Intervention. A more constructive way to optimise the psychological, emotional and physical outcomes for children and young people across their lifespan. One of my starting hypotheses will often be, well, there are valid reasons for this child to be rejecting a parent. When I'm not seeing any valid reasons or justifications for these young people to be rejecting a parent, it is only at that point I'm beginning to consider alternative hypotheses. And one of those alternative hypotheses is the possible absence or presence of parental alienation dynamics. But you need to be able to report on that kind of a methodology in a way that gives the courts confidence that it's a comprehensive report, rooted in best practice, rooted in the international evidence base, and therefore the courts are enabled and empowered to be making the firm and proactive decisions required in these cases. If we have made a determination that there is alienation, And if we have determined that it is on the severe end of the spectrum, as distinct from the mild to moderate end of the spectrum, well then the residency transfer of the child can be to the normal range healthy parent's home. We don't need to be putting them into centres. One of the key elements of the 3-month or 90-day piece is to remove the child from their intolerable psychological double bind, to remove them from their intolerable loyalty conflicts, where they are consistently being placed into a position where they must demonstrate loyalty to the pathogenic parent versus the normal range healthy parent. It's incredible to see it. I mean, I've worked with families where young people wouldn't have had contact with a parent for 2 years. And within 20 minutes, it is as if the relationship had never fractured. The key element is that the young person, the child, is put in a position where they can be themselves with the normal range healthy parent without the coercive control and undue influence of the pathogenic parent. And you can see the relief on the children in a very short period of time. And by relief, I mean obviously visually the relief, but I also mean in terms of psychosomatic symptoms are reduced. It's incredible to see it, absolutely incredible. Of course, some people will often hold an idea that that's a radical move. But we must remember that there is nothing in the literature that says returning a child to a normal range healthy parent is harmful to them. In other contexts, for example, if a child had been kidnapped or abducted, nobody would think twice about returning the child to the normal range healthy parent. Nobody would say to the child, well, would you like to stay with your abuser? There would be alternative care arrangements made. There are 40 odd years of research underpinning this. And by that I mean underpinning the assessments and underpinning the responses. In fact, if we leave the child with the abusive or pathogenic parent, we are condemning that child to a lifetime of psychological, emotional and physical harms. There's chronic anxiety for the young people across their lifespan to such a point where it'll interfere with day-to-day functioning. Clinical depression across their lifespan, premature sexual activity for young people, academic underachievement across their lifespan, active and passive suicidal ideation across their lifespan, deliberate self-harming behaviours across their lifespan. The list just goes on and on and on. And once we understand, or once we can view this behavioural presentation for what it is, and that is psychological and emotional abuse of a child, well then the solutions arise organically and very quickly and very easily. And once we have informed professionals utilising the international evidence-based best practice model of assessment, one that's would be well known at the moment is referred to as the 5-factor model. But then it's not good enough to simply take a child from one parent and give it to another parent, because that's not going to optimise the outcomes for the young person. What we must do then as professionals is provide a very clear structure or a roadmap for this young person to navigate back to both parents. And when the families engage in this process, as they have done with me, in a proactive and meaningful way, within 4 weeks at the end of the 3-month protective separation period, there is an effective parallel, often 50-50 week on week off parenting arrangement between the young person and both parents. Because that's what it's about. It's about moving past blame, moving past criticism, moving past judgment, and optimising the outcomes for the young person across their lifespan, and thereby a relationship with both parents. Since I've started, every time a judge has made an order for interim residency transfer, right, it has worked. I think there's a lot of systemic challenges in the family law system that sometimes gets in the way of people who are actually interested in placing children first. For example, very often there could be 50 cases listed on a day for one judge. One judge is never going to get through 50 cases in a day. And that creates delays. Part of any solution around this will have to include a review of the family law systems. So, I mean, I can only speak about Ireland, and as it happens, there seems to be a review happening. They would be provided with the necessary training and continuous professional development and so on and so forth to enable and empower them to create tangible change and difference in this space. Some of these families spend many, many years in courts. And that's not helpful either. I mean, if somebody is going to allege parental alienation, there needs to be a speedy assessment by an informed professional to reach a determination as to whether or not alienation is a factor in this case. In Israel, those kind of things happen within 14 days once there's an allegation made. Because early intervention is actually key. The Moldova decision made it very, very clear. Now, when there is an allegation of parental alienation, every court and every social worker in Europe is obliged to appoint an expert in parental alienation. You know, there's a couple of pillars. An obvious one would be the training. You know, anybody who's working with families needs to be aware of parental alienation. For example, in schools, very often a parent will be excluded from as an emergency contact, or a school will only provide information to one parent. Young people and children could receive a very clear message. It's not okay to reject one parent to please another. And the schools can often unwittingly become the flashpoint for this conflict, because oftentimes children will transition from the school to the other parent. I think the schools have a part to play there that could send a very clear message to parents that says, excuse me, you know, cop onto yourselves, deal with your conflict in healthy ways, and in the meantime, our duty of care as a school is to the young person. Full stop. The good news is that we now have a accredited postgraduate certificate in parental alienation studies. And so that's validated by the Maltese State Education Board and therefore has accreditation across Europe.